is Katamari Damacy, one of the best games of all time.
I noticed on the last recording I was muffled.
No, it sounds good. Yeah.
All right.
And it looks like we're going. Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Best Games of All Time podcast. I am Aaron. I'm back with my co-host, Brandon.
Yo.
And tonight we're talking about Katamari Damacy, the what's often described as an action puzzle game released for PS2 in 2004. I just think that's totally wrong as a description of the game. I think there are no puzzle aspects, and I think it's sort of an adventure game because it's in many ways about exploring. But it also just sort of defies genres, and it is just a singular video game. It's like nothing else that's ever been made. And many games have come out that have tried to capture a similar aesthetic, a similar, I think, sense of like physicality of playing with regard to like how the controls interface with the player. Nothing has, in my mind, come that close to doing what it's done. And I think it is sort of a perfect video game. And it's interesting to... It's kind of hard to talk about a game. It's like, what do you say about a game that has perfect graphics, perfect controls, perfect music? On this podcast, we've been critical of games, and I find myself sort of at a loss of almost what to say when confronted with this game that is just so singular, so together. I think it's interesting because I've been trying to think about perfect games and what games are perfect and what games try to be perfect. And I tend to think that games that want to be perfect also tend to be games that are very ambitious, right? They have huge scopes with lots of different systems and lots of sort of individual moving parts. But I think the more ambitious you are, it's harder to make sure that all of those parts work well individually, and as well as, you know, making them like all fit together well neatly. And here's a game that just did not care about doing any of that at all, and it ended up being perfect without ever really trying. And there's an interesting kind of anecdote from Keita Takahashi, who's the director of the game, where he said in an interview his bosses told him that the game needed more features, and he just proactively ignored that advice. And it's much to the game's credit that he did that. And so from the very start, it appears to have been a game that was focused on being simple, easy to pick up and play, nothing to distract the player from its single concept, and then just trying to eke every last ounce of gameplay out of that concept. So I just think it's perfect. I don't know how that sits with you.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. That's all. Like you said that all so well. Like I don't want this to be the like yes man podcast, but I agree with all of those things, and I'm hung up on that tidbit you shared with Takahashi's, unwavering steadfastness to say like, nope, this is the game, and I'm not adding more features because that's the kind of thing that you typically want to hear, or that you that you want to buy into when you're making a game, is to say like, oh yeah, great idea, let's add this, and that's exactly death by paper cuts. You watch this happen all the time to games where it loses all of its personality, and it gets lost in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the exact opposite of what this game did. And it's crazy to hear that was, I mean, obviously it's intentional, but even defiant, in a request for more. just makes me appreciate the game even more. And I do want to call out too, you're playing this game. This is like a recent play for you, right? You didn't play this
Yeah.
until recently, and I played it at launch in 2004, and whatever that was, 8,000 years ago. I loved it, like, and I thought it was perfect then, and I played it again, picked it up recently on the Switch, and I just kept, I thought it was just dripped in nostalgia, just saying this is a perfect game. I remember this, and I love it, and we'll get into the details of that, but I think that there is something remarkable there that I can play it with my nostalgia filter and trying to be objective, and then you can play it as a complete, noob to the Katamari world and come out with the same perspective on it. So perfect is not too strong a word for this game at all.
Yeah. It is interesting that, I just bought a PS2 copy off of eBay for like $10 and played it on my PS3. And, that's probably far from the ideal representation of the game because I'm probably playing it on too high res of a screen for its resolution, and it still just shines. And then I bought the Switch remaster too, and played it there, and it's sharper, but it didn't fundamentally change my experience. And it's an utterly timeless game. And if you've never played it, the game is just about rolling a huge ball around, and you use the 2 analog sticks to roll a ball, and you pick up stuff with the ball, and then as you roll over more stuff, it all sticks to the ball, and so the ball gets bigger, and you keep rolling it, and you can then roll up more stuff because your ball is bigger. And it starts off, you're rolling up like thumbtacks, and you're like a few centimeters tall, and you can just imagine exactly where that's going, right? It's like by the end of the game, you're rolling up like mountains and buildings and islands and clouds and stuff like that. So you just keep getting bigger, and it's such a beautifully simple concept that's all about physicality. It's all about the sort of tactile experience of moving around in a game world. And it's just so beautifully simple, and it really did shine for me, not even having any sort of nostalgia, pushing me to like it. So, yeah, it's just an awesome game. And I think I do want to talk more about Keita Takahashi, because I think talking about him and his background and sort of the circumstances that the game was made under help tell the story a little bit more about just what type of game it is. And I think the narrative that of the game's development speaks to us as sort of this like quintessential story, right? That we all know of the creative genius who is working inside of some restraints that basically don't allow his genius to be recognized. And I tried to think of, everyone knows this story, and I was trying to think of some examples, and the best one I could come up with was like Copernicus discovering that the Earth revolves around the sun, but mainly keeping that to himself because he knew that it would be blasphemy and his genius wouldn't be recognized. That's probably being a little too kind to Keita Takahashi to compare him to Copernicus. Or like in fiction, like Don Draper in the show Mad Men. Sometimes he has ideas that his bosses consider too radical or something like that. Those aren't very good examples, but everyone knows this story, and it does seem like the story is real. Has more or less like really happened with the creation of this game. Keita Takahashi was working at Namco, which was a company that was founded in the mid 1950s, and they originally were founded to like operate coin-operated amusement rides.
Yeah.
So they're a very old company rooted in coming out of like, post-war Japan. And so you can imagine the sort of hierarchy that would build up around that. And so we have young Keita Takahashi. He was he was a graduate of art school, and he was majoring in sculpture at art school, but he became disillusioned with it because he didn't see the point in sculpting a replica of a flower when he thought it would be much nicer to look at a real flower. But he did feel that he wanted to do something that could provide joy to people, and he thought video games would be a way to do that because they're purely focused on play. And so he was hired at Namco, and he's working as an artist, and he had an idea for a game where you roll a ball around and pick stuff up, but there was no real pathway for him to prototype it because he's an artist and not a game designer, right? In that hierarchical structure.
Got to keep that gate strong. That's right.
Right? Yeah. And the creative people are the creative people, and you stay out of their way.
That's right.
And so, and I don't know, like, I want to believe in the story, and I want to sort of fit it into that narrative of the creative genius. And I don't have enough details to know like exactly how true it is, but it does seem to be the case that he just pushed and pushed and believed in himself and believed in his idea, and he ended up getting into this program at Namco, which was for like training young game developers, and through that he got the resources he needed to make a prototype of the game. And apparently many of the objects in the game were made by students at a CG design school. Like, it wasn't professionals, it was just like people who were learning how to design 3D objects. And it was like, make a house, make a thumbtack, make a paperclip, make a birthday present, like all the stuff that you pick up in the game were made. Many of them appear to have been made by students. And so he's just sort of using like whatever resources are available to him because he just believed in his idea so much and just doing whatever he needed to do to get it done. And the game has this very sort of like, rough isn't the right word, but it's
constrained. Yeah.
It's constrained, and it has a very charming kind of like slapdash feel, but it all works in its favor. There are moments when you're playing the game and there's obvious clipping happening through, like your character's ball is clipping through some of the textures, and it doesn't matter at all. It doesn't like affect your immersion in the game world at all because it just works with the aesthetic of the game. So, very cool story behind the game's creation, and I think the story speaks volumes about what type of person Keita Takahashi is and how he believed in himself enough to push to get the game made.
Yeah, the game, it seems like on all fronts you kind of see like again these constraints that are being enforced in the real world, limiting what the game can do, and in a way that helped the game, that pushed, I don't want to say innovation, but it pushed creativity. I just think it's really interesting how wedded the game you experience, and it sounds like the development experience for the game itself were kind of playing off each other. That's even down to, like you said, like the students making the art, and that allows forgiveness in the art, which I didn't know as a player, right, as playing the game, but the stylization is just so clean and simple, that it's approachable to, you say like, oh, here we're going to give this to some art students, and the stuff that is yielded is still looks nice and it works with the game. You don't see these objects as like, wow, what's this disjoint? Why are some of these look like shit, and why it's just like on so many areas the game, with all of the constraints that were in place, the game succeeded, in spite of it all. and I think that's like you said, without knowing all the details, I think that's still a huge testament to Takahashi's genius there.
Yeah.
And like will. I don't know if it's will or genius, but yeah.
Some combination of that.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And there's an entry on this game in the Boss Fight Books series, which I'd be really interested to read. And I wish I had more details on it, but there's some, like, the game was apparently made for like less than $1 million. It's like 850,000 in US dollars. And just as a point of comparison, Final Fantasy VII, which came out 7 years before it, I think, was made for $40 million. And so it's like, which one is the better game? And that's kind of maybe a trite point to make. It's like, oh, a big budget game sucks, while this small little like indie-esque title does well. But it is like, it's interesting to see the types of a game that is made under very intense constraints, compared with a game that the sky was basically the limit. And which one is like more fun to play now? I love Final Fantasy VII, and they're not remotely comparable games, but I'm just thinking it's kind of an interesting comparison and a testament to what can happen when a creative person is put under constraints and they have to make decisions that end up making the end product very creative. So I just love the story around the game. I just think it's so awesome and such a cool thing to happen in video games, where we're sort of afflicted with sequelitis, and we're so reliant on these established media properties.
Yeah, and then it's interesting too, because you'd mentioned in our previous call how after all of this this journey, this struggle, and to get this game made, Namco basically turns to Takahashi and is like, "All right, let's have the sequels now, right? Like, you should."
Yes.
Thanks for your richness and creativity. Please sit in this box and give us more of one thing.
Right. Yeah, you're now the Katamari guy.
Yeah.
And he's like, wait, I have so many other cool ideas. Now let's do some of these. And he apparently, like, he went on the official website for Katamari at one point and was like, we will not be making any more Katamari games. And I'm sure I took that from Tim Rogers' review of this game for his website actionbut.net, but I'm sure that caused, as Tim says, that caused somebody to shit their pants at Namco. So funny. So just a cool guy. And it's when I think about the game, the thing that jumps out the most to me is just like how fun it is to move around in the world. And it's absolutely just a game about movement and the feeling of just being this unwieldy thing in the world and trying to control this ball that is rolling around on a rampage and lifting up people and trees and stuff like that. And that's really the whole game. And apparently, there's a talk that Keita Takahashi gave at one point where he's showing a prototype, and he just sort of muses to himself as he's watching the video of the prototype. He's like, wow, the game really hasn't changed at all since then, huh? So it's a very simple idea, and it's just about movement. And I think it's an interesting kind of jumping off point for talking about difficulty in games, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot lately. And it is not a very hard game, right? I think most people would agree with that. When I have played it recently, I think the first time I played it, there were a few levels that I had to do more than one time because I didn't pick up enough stuff. But most players will probably complete most of the levels on the first try or on the second try. But it's worth thinking about, I think, in the context of Katamari, like, what is the purpose of difficulty in games? Why do developers make games difficult? And I think it's to make your decisions meaningful. right? Like you want to make the right decision. You don't want the punishment that comes with failure. But I just think it's so cool that in this game, um, every second feels meaningful, right?
Mhm.
You're constantly plugged in and you're very motivated, and it's not hard at all. And that's sort of an interesting experience, just because if we think about games that are fun but not hard, we might think of something like Stardew Valley,
Mhm.
something very slow paced. But this is obviously not that at all. It's sort of a manic experience. And I'm trying to figure out why, every second feels so meaningful. It's like nothing compares to the feeling in this game of when you're, it's in one of the early levels, and you have a really tiny Katamari, and it's more nimble than you are when you get really huge and you're like
Mhm.
picking up buildings, and you're trying to pick up like a little uh, push pin for a paper clip or something, and you roll around it in a complete circle, and
Yeah,
you
like multiple
almost,
times.
yeah, and you almost get it, but you just miss it, and it, it just feels so meaningful and engaging. And another thing that I was thinking about is like I hate memorizing levels in games. I hate it as a game mechanic or a requirement on the player, at least. I just think it's such an antiquated approach to game design. And there's still a lot of that in games today. In this game, you have to memorize levels, but it happens so naturally that you don't even realize it's happening, you know?
Yeah, the progression of how you grow in the way that it doesn't like very fluidly take you from one area to another. Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, and you kind of learning that pattern. It almost even helps when you're on a new level, knowing like, all right, everything in this area I'm gonna go for, and I don't
Mhm.
have to worry about anything else until minutes later when you forget about that altogether and you're rolling into the next area, and now you're the smallest object in this whole expanse. You
Mhm.
start it all over again. Like it's got that pattern down very well,
Yeah.
uh, and you always right in front of you. You always have a visible physical reflection of your purpose. Right?
Mhm.
It's like right there, like being pushed around, and I think that builds into how this like why does every moment matter? Because at every moment you have a reminder like here's this thing, you need to make it bigger, right? And
Yes.
you're just driving to that, uh, and then with that, that's at a very a limited view. But then as you get used to the game from the get-go, oh, I've got 8 minutes to make whatever it is, 6 meter ball. Like that's plenty of time, right? And then the next time you come to the level, you're like, I need to get fucking moving
Mhm.
because if I'm gonna get so yeah, I think it is interesting how frenetic it feels while also just being fun. It's not
Mhm.
it's a different kind of it's a very enjoyful a very a stress with wonderment. It's a lot of fun.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah, and it's it so I think it's that comes from it just being about one thing. It's like let's make the
Hmm.
feeling of moving in the world fun, and everything sort of falls into place after that. And it's like you memorize the levels because you're like, "Oh, I got all the stuff in this area. Now I need to find um, bigger stuff to roll up. So I have to go to this other part of the level, and you play the level a couple times and you just start to work out your own path. It's like, I'm going to
Hmm.
pick up all the stuff over here and I'm going to go over here. And then you've memorized the level in the way that you actually need to complete the level, right? It's like some levels, some of the harder levels, it's like you do sort of need to be on your toes and be like, okay, I got to get this stuff here, then go over here and get this stuff, and then it'll be big enough to go over here. And but it happens so naturally. It's like if you have a place that you like to go in the real world and you drive there because you want to go there and you're not thinking about, oh, I need to memorize like how to get there. You just keep going there because you like going there, and then before you know it, you've memorized how to get there. It works the same way in this game, right? It happens as a very natural thing. So yeah, it's like I'm never frustrated playing the game. There's no bullshit task to do because he proactively ignored his boss's recommendation to add more features to the game. You always know what to do next. You're never stuck. And it's just, I guess it comes down to like making the core experience very fun. And I am overly reliant, I think, on comparing stuff to Mario.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think there's something in how surely some of the earliest sort of parts of designing the original Super Mario Brothers revolved around making it fun to move Mario around in the world and sort of trying to get a handle on, okay, how can we make it feel fun to jump on a moving platform? And adding Mario's famous skid into that, where he skids across the platform a little bit, and you have to try to control that. And the sort of very minute but very important changes in direction you can make to Mario's jump while he's still in the air. I have to believe that came early on in the game design. Similarly to this game, I have to believe that it was a very early stage of the design where they worked out like, okay, you're going to roll the ball around and feel like this. And the end result is that the whole game ends up being built around that really basic fun thing. And the whole game is fun. And that's just how it happens, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's just when the core of your game is movement, you need to focus on that, and they did, and it shows, and it just feels so tight, and yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't really have more to add to that. It's solid.
Yeah, it makes me almost. It's almost like a racing game where it's all about movement, and the fun is in the movement, but it's transplanted into this sort of like action exploration game format, something like that. I don't know, but it's a very.
No, yeah, I was just gonna say, yeah, it's. I think that's actually a great analogy because some of the best racing games, it's all about how well you can translate the sensitivity of your input to an output in a way that's not finicky or overreactive or under, like you need everything to move in a way that feels like it actually would in the real world. And I've never rolled a Katamari around, but I feel like this is what it would feel like, if I need, like,
yes,
these are the controls that I would need to do it well. And since that's what this world is built on, that's what they focused on, and it paid, dividends with the interactions.
Yes. I think, yeah, I want to, well, so tell me more about that, because I don't play that many racing games, but now that you describe it like that, I want to play more. It's because I notice when I'm playing Katamari, I have completely lost the feeling of thinking about the controls at all.
Mm-hmm.
And it even though it's an extremely unconventional control scheme for a video game, just moving with 2 analog sticks, and you can use one other button to like jump up and look around the level, which I never use.
Never use it. Nope.
Right? So it's really just the 2 sticks, and it totally feels like its own thing, right? It feels like you're controlling the Katamari, and the way you're sort of jerking the sticks around in different directions to do these like hairpin turns and stuff, and you always feel like slightly out of control. The controls are utterly perfect in terms of making it feel like you're moving this huge unwieldy bouncing thing around a
Yeah.
world.
Yeah, and I think part of that is the way that they translate the physics of what's happening, right? Because like you said, you go from being able to turn on a dime to your own disadvantage, right, where you can spin around the object you're trying to get on, to then having this thing that's the size of a city that you know you need to make a left turn soon, but you also know like I started too late and it's just gonna be this wild,
Yes.
really open turn now. You can feel it getting away from you, which
Yeah.
is amazing. There's no force feedback. I mean, you have rumble, but there's no force feedback on the thumbsticks. It's not like you have some sort of extra sensory feedback going on, and it feels like this thing is getting away from you if so yeah, really interesting. I mean, like I don't know, I can't get off of that point of the core of the game is moving a ball, and they clearly, that was the focus, like that was it, right? And yeah,
it is there are many moments in the game that are like singular moments within the game where you do something and it's like, oh man, that felt so good. One is for me is it. Can you hear me?
yeah, I got some echo there.
Okay, my cat is up here and like fucking with my stuff. The one of those for me is like when you roll up, you can finally roll up trees, and you just roll up like 20 trees in one go, and it's like and pops, and they all get on the ball, and you're just instantly so much bigger. It feels so good.
There's a feeling, yes, that's a good point. There is a feeling to picking stuff up that you couldn't before. I have the same thing with like fences. When I roll up fences, you get like a whole line of them. Yeah, but there's a. I should pay more attention to it. I don't know if it's the sound that it makes when you do it, or if maybe it's the sequential. When you're when you roll over like a mini forest, though, like you're totally right. Like a group of trees, like that's like one of the most satisfying things in the game, which is crazy to say. Like the sentence that I'm saying out loud, I'm like, I sound like a fucking dumbass, but like, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Like you hit those objects or those collections, and it's incredibly gratifying.
Yeah. The trees are one of those for sure. Like being able to go back and roll up something that really fucked with you before,
totally.
like a bulldog, when the bulldog used to chase you when you had a small Katamari, but now that you're big, you can go back and just roll it up onto your ball.
Or like one of those, like a fast car that like smashes the shit out of your ball and sends you flying.
Yeah, do you know the one
city later and you just demolish it and it screams, which just adds to the joy. Like, yeah, fuck you.
And the one that always gets me, I can't remember which level it's on, but it's like the duck mobile. Do you know what I'm talking about?
That's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the fast little, yeah, yep.
It's like a duck mobile that has like a fire coming out the back because it's going so fast, and you just feel so good to go back and roll that up. Yeah. And you said fences. Like I always go for fences, and as soon as I can roll up fences, I'm like, oh yeah. Even though it makes the Katamari so oblong,
it's the non-optimal thing to do for sure, but I go for it every time.
Me too.
Yep. And I think it's that consecutive collection element. There's something about that.
Yeah. Because they're right next to each other, right? So you can get so many in one go. And sunflowers too have like a fence type effect of making you
a garden with carrots in it.
Oh yeah. I love that. I also love the level where you have to get all the crowns, and you roll over a garden thinking that you're gonna pick up like potatoes or something, and it's actually like crowns buried
Yeah.
under the soil, and then there's also someone wearing a crown buried under the soil, and so you roll over it and you pick up an entire person
Nice.
who was under the soil. And of course, they scream
Right.
when you
The
do
scream
that.
is great.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a quirk to the game that
Yeah.
expresses itself in all facets of the game. It's
Mhm.
not just the scream or like a person buried in the garden. You know what I mean? That's actually a good example of how weird the game is, where it's like, yeah, I'm picking up crowns and one came out of the garden, and one of the ones that came out of the garden had a person attached to it, and it's like, yep, this is what this game offers.
Yeah.
You know, the music is off the wall and phenomenal.
Oh, the
Um,
music's so good. Yeah.
Yeah, just like the character designs are weird
Mhm.
and adorable, right? It's like tapping into the Baby Yoda before there was even that existing in the world, right?
Mhm.
There's this little adorable green thing, and uh, even the king,
I love the
who's
king.
who's a giant douche, is
Mhm.
like fantastic. Like,
Yeah.
yes, I want to. Like, what are you gonna say next?
There
Um,
there's many aspects of the quirk that I feel like we need to talk about. I on our pre-call you said something where it's like you know it feels like there was a moment when they were developing the game where it's like they were all sitting in a room, and there's like an object in the middle of a room that's weird, you know, and they all just agreed on what that weird thing should be, and they all got it right,
right. Yeah,
such
yeah.
that
The music person went off and said, like, I understand how to make a weird thing, a weird music based off of this object that represents the object, and the writer and the designer, and they all brought back their craft's interpretation of that weird thing, and when they put it together, we got this game, and it you know the integration was seamless. You know, there's
yeah,
yeah.
it is its own completely its own aesthetic, and I think that's very important to point out because it's a Japanese game, but it is very much not weird Japan. You know,
Yeah.
like the sort of stereotype weird Japan. Like there are no phalluses in the game that I was able to find. It's not kawaii, which is the sort of Japanese like ultra cute aesthetic. It's just its own thing, and it comes out in, like you said, the character designs. There is a nice bulge in the game. The King of All Cosmos has a nice bulge.
Oh yeah, he can't help that though.
Right. It's not
He was
like
born that way.
yeah, he was born that way, and it's not like it's because he's sort of an homage to like a Freddie Mercury or something like that.
Totally.
I think,
Totally.
and yeah, the quirkiness and the weirdness comes out in the music too. It's like it's so many different genres of music, and I'm going to edit some of the different songs into the final
Nice.
recording, just so people can hear if you haven't played the game. But there is like a mambo type song. There's a kind of like electro pop type song that's called Lonely Rolling Star. It's my favorite song in the game. And there are a number I know that you liked a lot too. And they're all just there's like a lounge singer type song, you know, and it all just works for the game. And the music director is this guy named Yu Miyake, and he's an in-house composer at Namco. And he said that Keita Takahashi gave him just complete freedom to make the music however he wanted, which is very important. I think, firstly, because he said a normal director would never let him do that.
Right.
but it also speaks to what you were saying about it's like they all got the aesthetic. They all had a great understanding of what would make sense for the game and what it should be, and so it all just feels like of a piece.
Yeah, and the only way that could happen, right, is when you allow someone in their area of expertise to really let their interpretation shine. And when you start trying to shoehorn it to something else or edit someone's creativity, then you kind of impinge on that. And that makes sense than what, the director or the music, the composer is saying is their free reign was not impinged on.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, again, it's just so very clear that this team was able to do their thing individually and then bring it together. That's why it came together so well.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't competition, right? It was. I think it's probably a testament to his direction.
Mm-hmm. He did say that once he had a prototype, there was like an internal meeting at Namco where he showed it to lots of different people and said, and then I guess he had the opportunity to sort of choose who was going to work on the final game, and he said he just picked the people he thought were the coolest to work on it, which is so funny. Yeah, the I think he probably wrote most of the dialogue, but we should talk about the writing in the game, which is just outstanding. At least in the English translation, it is almost all of the dialogue comes from the King of all Cosmos, who's your dad, and your dad in the game has accidentally knocked all the stars out of the sky. And he's like, whoops, I didn't mean to do it, but I kind of wanted to do it. It was just very fun to do. But anyway, now we need to put all the stars back. And that's why you're rolling around a ball in the game, is to pick up stuff from Earth, which you bring to him, and then he puts it into the sky as a star to replace the ones that he knocked down. And he's such an awesome character because he speaks your language, whatever language it is you're playing the game in, and it's like he understands all of for us in English, he understands all of the rules of English, he knows all the words, and he knows how to put them together, but he's just, maybe because he's a celestial being, he's just coming at it from a different perspective. Mm-hmm. And so he just says all this stuff that's like very slightly off, or completely ignores any sort of social decorum. Like, there's one of my favorite quotes is after you complete a level, he's like, "Oh, looks like you're done. It was boring to watch this whole time." That's right. One of my favorite quotes from the game, where he just says that to you. And he says a lot of funny stuff, like if you fail the level. I guess I don't want to spoil it if anyone listening wants to play the game and hasn't yet, but some of my favorite dialogue comes out of him berating you for failing and calling you, throwing insults at you like loser prince, inchling prince. It's just so awesome.
Yeah, and the way the writing comes across, I think goes back to your point about the, being a game from Japan without going into the extremes or needing to go to the extremes of like any of those not the memes, but just those known archetypes of how characters behave. It doesn't go into any of those tropes. It's all its own thing while still being a different flavor of weird. I don't know. I'm struggling to really kind of nail that down, but there is something about it, and it really does come through in the writing and the way, the type of dialogue that they use at you, where it's both berating, but then also it's like this guy does care for you. You're his son, right? But it's also clear you're servile. Like you need to do.
Yeah.
You need to clean this mess up. Like
It's a really interesting. Yeah, it's like he never acknowledges for a moment his role in the big problem that
Right.
you and him are both trying to solve right now, which is to get all the stars back into the sky. There's the totally weird, like, sort of second layer of narrative where it's like a family.
Oh, that's right.
And it just like, it's, it's very funny, and it has like no connection with the gameplay whatsoever, other than it is trying to say something I think funny about children, and children kind of being perceptive, maybe because they're not as worried as adults about keeping up appearances, or doing stuff like being where they're supposed to be on time, and so maybe adults notice different stuff, and it comes out through it. It's like there's one scene where it shows this child, like, he sees the Katamari out of, I think he's flying on an airplane, and he sees the King of all Cosmos just flying through the sky, and his eyes like freak out, and he's like, "Mom, look, look, look!" And she looks, and by that time the thing is already gone. She goes back to like reading a newspaper or something, and he's like, "I just saw this enormous guy," and his mom's like, "That's nice, dear."
Right.
And so they're like mini scenes of that sort of second layer of the narrative that are sort of about that. It's like the child is perceptive and more in tune with what's going on, and the parents like, yeah, that's interesting, honey. Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
While their world is being rolled up. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting in that it kind of has something to say, and it's interesting coming from Keita Takahashi, who has said that he would love to design playground equipment one day, and he said that something like adults should play video games maybe because it's not socially acceptable for adults to play outside in the same way that children play outside, and but we need to play and do things that make us happy. And it's kind of naive and twee a little bit of a sentiment maybe, but it just works for me with who Keita Takahashi is. And so I just really like him, and I love the quirk that comes out in basically all facets of the game. Well, yeah, I mean, it's like, who is the game for, right? And I think on the one hand, like, in accordance with what he says his mission kind of is in making games, it's really for everyone.
Yeah.
And it makes me think of this, like what we got our kids for Christmas. One of the things was a marble run. And the marble run very proudly states on the box that it's for ages 4 to 99. And it's magnetic. It's like when the marble run, when we've built one and it's the kids are playing with it, we're all just sort of glued to it in a way. It's like impossible to ignore the marbles just bouncing from side to side and going down these tubes and tunnels and stuff like that. And this game is sort of like that. It's for anyone, for most people at least. If Katamari Damacy is on in a room, they're going to find it really hard not to pay attention to it, because it's just so interesting, like the way it looks.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, and this, like, yeah, the way it looks and the sounds and again the movement, like, which I guess is the way it looks, right? It was like, what am I seeing? Is your first kind of reaction.
Yeah, it's very magnetic in that way. And And so, it's like I just think about games and everyone, ever since Roger Ebert kicked the hornet's nest by saying games aren't art, everyone, I feel like games have been in this mode of just frothing to be taken seriously as a form of mass market entertainment. But the games that we push forward as being the best representatives of the medium are nearly all about killing people in some way, shape, or form. And then I think, like, who among us doesn't have some memory of watching an adult in our lives play Sonic the Hedgehog or Super Mario Brothers at some point, right? Or Pac-Man at some point in the 90s or late 80s. And I feel like a game like Katamari is much more lends itself to that.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison too, because I was thinking before, Katamari is very much a game that could go to the arcade, right? And I think there's something to that. Like, when you're in an arcade, you see people of all ages there, and it's not just kids, it's not just parents there because of their kids. People of all ages are on these machines, and that's something that Katamari lends itself to. Is that it would be a perfect arcade cabinet. It's loud and flashy and weird and interesting, and then even an arcade cabinet would have that extra level of physical interaction that would feel really good, and it would give back to that in that feeling. So maybe that's part of why it does extend to everyone. Is it's accessible. It's accessible in control, but then it's also accessible in output of what am I looking at, and it's unfamiliar, and I think that's a big part of it too. Is when you're unfamiliar, you're going to attract, at least at a glance, more people. Like, it's not like this game wasn't a 20 million seller, but I think that has that's more on like marketing and people's experiment, willingness to experiment with something and all that. But I think there's something to it where it's there's a magnetism, like you're saying, where it doesn't matter what experiences you've had or how long you've been playing games.
Yeah, I think about how at like family gatherings for a while, but when we could all still get together, like we still play Wii bowling. And even my grandma, R.I.P., used to get up and play like a few rounds of Wii bowling. And, my grandma probably wouldn't have played Katamari, but she probably would have at least watched it. Because it's like impossible not to look at it. And it's just this magnetic experience. And it, like, for my family, once I started playing it, it like took over our family for several weeks, where we were playing it every night, and we were listening to the music when we weren't playing it. Like, we put on music in the house for the kids to just like run around and dance to, and we'd put on the music, and they loved doing that. And the other thing is, it's unlike a lot of the games that we were saying that are put forward as like, this is the best example of storytelling or whatever in our media, which might be something like The Last of Us. That game in many ways, I think, takes a lot of cues from film, and it tries to borrow a lot of it's what it tries to do to pull you in is maybe adapted from film. And that Katamari Damacy is purely a video game, and it never tries to borrow a single thing from any other medium.
It leans fully on everything that games can offer in every aspect, and nails it in every aspect.
And let me just close this section with a quote from my friend's wife, who I bought him this game for Christmas. I just sent it to him, and his wife got really into it, and she just texted me and said, "This is a hard game, but it gives you just enough success to keep you in it." And I just thought that was so, because she doesn't really play games, that much, and she was able to pick it up and have a great time with it, and that she would recognize that it has a well-crafted difficulty curve was just so interesting to me, and really speaks to um, what a sort of all ages, all types of people experience it is.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And I think we were also talking about, who is this game for? I think for one, it's for people of all ages, like we were saying. But I think it's also for people who, if you are a person who likes to think of yourself as someone who doesn't give a fuck about what other people think about them, or if you don't want to give a fuck about what other people think about you, this is a game for you. We were talking about in our pre-call how it's funny how the game opens with the sound of an idiot, a moron, humming the game's theme song. And first of all, that is really Yu Miyake, the music director in the game, humming.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
he put it in as in a test version of the game, as a joke.
The programmer art equivalent of a music like a placeholder.
Yes.
Fantastic. That makes me love it even more.
Isn't that so awesome? And they just kept it in. And then we were talking about how you and I, that's something we do. We're just like humming to ourselves at home, like doing drum sounds and stuff when we're humming.
Right.
And our and he's like, you know, like the drum sounds. And we're doing stuff like this, and our wives come up to us and they're like, "Are you trying to get my attention? Like, are you just doing that for yourself?"
Right. This is all for me, baby.
Yeah. Hell yeah. I'm doing it for myself.
Oh, sorry. I didn't notice you there.
Yeah.
Am I doing it again?
This is all me.
Yeah.
So if you're a person who likes to do that and thinks it's cool to do that, like Brandon and I do, that's what this game is. It's just someone doing something for themselves and not caring about what anyone else thinks.
I like that angle on it, because if I think about all of the creative geniuses in their areas working on this, you know, is I'm gonna make the music. Sure, I have the inspiration, but like I'm gonna go make this music, and that's the music that I want for this, right? And here's what it's going to look like, and yeah, just across the board, it's people doing their thing. In the way, like you said, that I would, where it's like, I'm just going to mouth this song, and now that's in the final cut of the game as an actual song. There's the authenticity, I think, is what is so gripping, and the relatability of that authenticity of there's no pretense here. You know, I'm making sounds with my mouth. I'm just a goofball. And that's the opener for the game, is I'm just a goofball, right? It's just like I'm just here to hang out. Very unassuming and just very welcoming. Yeah.
Yeah, if you're a moron or an idiot like Brandon
like us.
and I, then
you're
this
gonna love
is a game for you. You're gonna love this game.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just so cool, and it's almost like a proto indie game in a sense. I feel like, just because it is. I think I said that about another game that we covered or something, but it is like it, you know, because it is clearly subservient to the kind of whims of just a few key creative members, which is what you get from indie games, and why so many people like myself like them. Because you are closer to the creative vision of someone who has a definite idea of what they want to make. And it's definitely not the case when you're playing a AAA game, which goes through many, many rounds of people checking it, and, you know, focus groups and stuff like that. And, you know, it's like we were saying in the beginning, it's like too many pieces to make them all fit together well, or make them all work well. And typically an indie development, there aren't the resources to make so many little pieces. And so what ends up happening is it's like, let's try to do one or two things well. And those are more pure experiences, right? Like that was one of our knocks on Hades, is that it sort of dilutes its own experience by adding a bunch of stuff on around the edges that don't really add much to the game, but sort of reduce the how much it's honed to deliver just one thing very well. And so this is a game that was doing that in like 2004 within the confines of what must have been a pretty hierarchical organization, and Namco. And so it's remarkable in a lot of ways for many of the reasons we talked about, the story behind the game, and just the fact that it exists. I mean, who saw a less than $1 million budget game coming out of Namco at the time that they were making, $10 million or more Ridge Racer games and Soul Calibur and other games like that? It's just kind of a miracle to me, and it's great.
Yeah, I can't. It's great. It's one of the best games of all time.
It's one of the best games of all time. It is better than Ocarina of Time. It is better than Zelda Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity. It's better than Hades. I don't know if it's better than Doki Doki Literature Club, but
it's better than Doki Doki.
It's probably better than Doki Doki Literature Club, but it's
I know
hard to
Doki
say
Doki
that.
Doki Doki is a big one for you, so that was more of a troll than anything.
But I'm willing to accept it. If I am the type of person, if I'm living my best life and being my best self, it's better than Doki Doki Literature Club.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
So I think that wraps it up.
For sure.
So if you haven't played this game, you must play the game. It is available for every console imaginable. You can buy a cheap copy on eBay if you only have a PS2 or a PS3. It's been remastered for PS4, Switch, I think Xbox. I'm sure it's on PC. Please play the game. Short game. Won't take up too much of your time. Very fun game. And if you want to email our podcast and tell us about how wrong we are, you can email us at bestgamespod@gmail.com.
And really lean into it, too.
Yeah. Really send us death threats because we said Ocarina of Time wasn't good.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, for sure. We'll get them for that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Send us the death threats, and you can also check out our website, which is at bestgamesofalltimepodcast.com. Thanks for listening.
See ya.
How do I cancel the stop recording? Okay.
Where's the stop button at?